She handed me a typed list of conditions the first time I brought my granddaughter a birthday cake. I'd driven 40 minutes from Decatur to Marietta with a lemon cake in a white box on the passenger seat, the kind Claire used to make every year, 3 layers with the candy peel on top. My granddaughter Lily was turning 4. I wasn't even planning to stay long. I just wanted to hand her the cake and watch her face when she saw it. My daughter-in-law Simone met me at the front door before I could knock. She looked at the cake box. Then she looked at me. Then she reached into the back pocket of her jeans and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She'd printed it on their home printer, double-spaced, organized into numbered sections. No unannounced visits. Visits limited to the second and fourth Saturday of each month, 2 hours maximum. No food brought into the home without prior approval of ingredients. No discussing parenting decisions. No taking Lily off the property without 48 hours written notice. No posting photographs of Lily on any social media platform. I stood on the front porch holding a birthday cake and read all 6 points. My son Owen was somewhere inside. I could hear a football game. He didn't come to the door. I'm Grant Calloway. I'm 58 years old. I spent 23 years working as a contractor in the Atlanta metro area. Residential builds mostly, a few commercial projects in my 40s. I'm not a complicated man. I like things measured right the first time. I like knowing what I'm working with before I start. Claire died 2.5 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She was 54. From the first diagnosis to the last morning was 8 months, which is long enough to hope and short enough to still feel like it happened while you were looking the other way. She was the kind of woman who kept a running list of people she needed to check on. Neighbors going through hard times. Owen's old teachers. Her cousin in Pensacola who never had anyone visit. She didn't make a big deal out of caring about people. She just did it the way you breathe. She loved Lily completely, from the moment Owen sent us the first photo in the hospital. She used to say that becoming a grandmother was the first time she'd understood what her own mother meant when she said some love doesn't have a ceiling. After Claire died, I did what I thought was right. I gave Owen space to grieve in his own way. I didn't push. I called when I said I would, and I didn't call when I said I wouldn't. When Owen and Simone told me they were thinking about buying a house, I offered to help. We sat at my kitchen table and I wrote them a check for $55,000. Every dollar of it was from a life insurance policy Claire and I had been paying into for 20 years. She would have wanted it used for exactly that. I told Owen it was a gift, no strings. I didn't even ask to see the house before they closed. I thought that was what family did. I understand now that I was the only one in that transaction who thought so. The rules on the paper didn't come out of nowhere. I know that now. They were the end of a road that had been building for a while. Things between Simone and me had never been quite easy. Not hostile, just careful on her end, in a way that always kept a little distance, no matter what I did. When Owen first brought her home, I thought she was reserved, private. I respected that. Some people need time to warm up, and I wasn't in any rush. But after Claire died, the carefulness got more deliberate. Visits got scheduled instead of spontaneous. Owen started texting ahead of time to clear things before I called. I noticed it. But I told myself I was reading too much into it. I was grieving. People do strange things when they're grieving. I tried to stay steady. The cake visit was 8 months after we buried Claire. I didn't sign the paper. I didn't say anything inflammatory either. I handed Simone the cake through the half-open door and asked her to tell Lily happy birthday from me. I drove back to Decatur in the kind of quiet where you're running the same few sentences through your head over and over, trying to understand how you arrived somewhere you never meant to go. I called Owen that night. He said Simone had just been feeling like things weren't structured enough. He said she liked to know what to expect. I told him I understood wanting structure. I told him I didn't understand why I needed a written document to bring my granddaughter a birthday cake. He said he'd talk to her. He didn't sound like a man who was going to talk to her. Over the next several months, I followed the rules. Every one of them. I texted 48 hours before every visit. I showed up on the second and fourth Saturday. I didn't bring food. I didn't discuss how they were raising Lily or comment on anything in their house or park in a driveway if Simone's car was there. I swallowed every instinct I had because I knew that if I gave Simone a single documented instance of me not following the rules, the visits would get shorter or disappear entirely. Lily was 4, then almost 5. She had Claire's way of tilting her head sideways when she was thinking hard about something. She liked to narrate whatever she was doing out loud, a constant running commentary, putting her shoes on, picking up a crayon, deciding which cup to use. I used to watch her and think about Claire doing the exact same thing in the kitchen. Not out loud the way Lily did it, but present in everything she touched. During one visit that winter, Lily climbed up next to me on the couch with a book about a bear who couldn't find his way home. She read it out loud to me, stumbling over a few of the longer words, looking up at me after each page, like she was checking that I was still paying attention. When she got to the last page, where the bear finally makes it back, she closed the book and patted my hand twice the way old women do and said, "Don't worry, Grandpa Grant. You always know where to find me." I had to look out the window for a minute. About a year after the list arrived, Owen called and asked if we could meet for lunch. He named a Cracker Barrel off I-280F, roughly halfway between us. Neutral territory. Though, I didn't say that. We sat across from each other with coffee, and he had the practiced look of someone who had gone over what he wanted to say. Enough times that it had stopped sounding natural. He talked about how things had been stressful, how Simone felt like Lily's schedule was being disrupted by the visits, how Lily was sensitive to changes in routine. I'd watched Lily run to the front window every second and fourth Saturday looking for my truck, but I didn't say that either. Then he told me about the new arrangement. Simone felt that if I wanted to maintain consistent access to Lily, it was reasonable for me to contribute to her activities. Swim lessons, dance. The costs added up, he said. He was looking at his coffee mug while he said it. She had suggested a monthly contribution, transferred directly to an account she managed, $350 a month. Not as payment, he said, as family participation. I looked at my son for a long moment. He was 34 years old. He had dried paint on his forearm from a weekend project, and he was explaining to me that seeing my granddaughter was going to cost $350 a month going forward. I told him I needed some time. He nodded like that was the expected response. I drove back to Decatur and sat in the driveway for a while before going inside. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet for 2.5 years, which is a specific kind of quiet that doesn't get easier the longer you're in it. I sat at the kitchen table where Claire used to grade papers. She taught 4th grade for 18 years. She'd sit there with a red pen and a glass of sweet tea, and I'd sit across from her with whatever I was looking at, and we'd talk about nothing in particular for hours. I thought about Lily patting my hand twice. I thought about $55,000 going into a house I'd never been invited to spend a night in. I thought about a name I'd been given about 3 months earlier by a guy I used to do builds with. A man named Roy who'd gone through a bad custody situation after his divorce. He'd mentioned a family law attorney in Cobb County named Philip Sato. Patient, Roy said. Not the kind of guy who swings first. I had the number on my phone. I called Philip Sato the next morning. He listened to the full story without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a few seconds. And then he said, "Mr. Calloway, before our next conversation, I want you to do 3 things. Save every text, every email, every document Simone has sent you. Write down every visit that was cut short or denied, with dates. And I want you to contact whoever handled the financial transfer when you gave your son the $55,000. I asked him what the money had to do with it. He said the documentation of a financial gift can matter a great deal under Georgia family law, depending on how the transfer was made and recorded. He said he wanted to understand the full picture. I'd handled the transfer through my personal bank, First National, down on Commerce Drive, and I had a relationship with a banker there named Greg Alderman who had managed my business accounts for 12 years. I called Greg that afternoon and explained what was going on and asked him to pull everything related to the transfer. What Greg found took me a few days to fully absorb. The $55,000 I'd given Owen and Simone had not gone entirely toward the down payment. Greg walked me through the account history, which I had access to because Owen and I had briefly shared a business account years ago, and some of the transfer documentation fed through a linked account that hadn't been fully separated. A portion of the gift, roughly $19,000, had moved out of their joint account within the first year. The transfers were made in installments, small enough not to flag anything. They landed in an account that Greg confirmed was registered solely in Simone's name at a different bank. The account had been opened 4 months after Owen and Simone closed on the house. Owen's name was not on it. I sat in Greg's office looking at the paper trail, and I thought about Owen's face at the Cracker Barrel. The careful, coached expression of a man reciting something he'd been asked to say. I thought about whether he knew. I decided he didn't. I'm still not sure which answer would have been worse. Philip and Greg worked together over the following 5 weeks. I didn't change anything in my routine. I showed up on the second and fourth Saturday. I texted 48 hours ahead. I sat in their sectional and watched Lily do crafts, and I didn't let anything show on my face. Lily asked me once during that period why I wasn't talking as much as usual. I told her I was thinking. She asked what about. I said I was thinking about what I was going to teach her next time. She accepted this completely, the way children accept most things from people they trust, and went back to gluing glitter onto a piece of construction paper. I drove to Marietta on a regular Saturday morning, 5 weeks after my first conversation with Philip. I had a large manila envelope on the passenger seat in the same spot where the birthday cake had been. Inside the envelope was a formal letter from Philip Sato's office. It outlined the $55,000 transfer, documented as a loan given the circumstances and the financial trail that followed, and it requested full repayment. It also clearly stated that under Georgia law, specifically OCGA 1973, grandparents have the right to petition the court for visitation rights when a grandparent-grandchild relationship has been established and when denial of visitation would harm the child's health or welfare. The letter documented the pattern of restricted access, the escalating conditions, and the monetary demand. It was not aggressive, it was thorough. Philip had been careful about every word. Simone answered the door. She had the same careful smile she always wore when I arrived. I told her I had something for Owen. She started to say that he was in the middle of something. I said it would only take a moment and asked her to get him. Owen came to the door with the easy look of someone who isn't expecting anything unusual. He saw the envelope. The look changed. I handed it to him. He opened it in the doorway. Simone was standing close enough behind him that she could read over his shoulder. He went through the first page slowly, then the second. I watched his face change the way weather changes when you're watching it from a porch, not dramatic, but real. He looked up at me. "Dad," he said. "What is this?" "It's a letter from my attorney," I said, "and a financial summary from my banker. I think you should read both of them, and then I think you and Simone need to have a conversation." He looked at her. She was looking at the envelope. "I don't know what you think you've found," she started. "Simone," I said, "the account is documented. The transfers are documented." I wasn't angry saying it. I want to be clear about that because I know how it could sound. I had been sitting with this for 5 weeks. I had made my decision about how I wanted to handle it a long time before I drove to Marietta that morning. I wasn't there to make a scene. I'd never been a man who made scenes. "This isn't an attack," I said, "but Owen deserves to know what's been happening. And I deserve to know what's been happening. And I deserve to know my granddaughter." Lily appeared at Owen's hip, the way children materialize out of nowhere. She looked up at me from under Owen's arm. "Hi, Grandpa Grant," she said. "Hi, sweetheart," I said. Owen looked at me over her head. It was the face of a man who had just been handed the key to a door he didn't know was locked. Embarrassment and confusion, and something underneath both of those things that looked almost like relief. He stepped back from the door. "Come in, Dad," he said. We sat at their kitchen table for close to 2 hours. Simone had explanations at first. The money had been moved into savings. She was managing household finances more efficiently. She'd intended to consolidate accounts. But the documentation was what it was, and at some point the explanation stopped, and she just sat quietly, and that's what happens when someone runs out of story. Owen called Philip the following week, not as an opponent, just as someone trying to understand what options existed. There were conversations over the following months that I was part of, and many I wasn't. That's Owen's marriage, and I'm not going to summarize it. That's his story. What I can tell you is that they're still together. It's been about 7 months now, and I don't know exactly what their arrangement looks like behind closed doors. What I know is that I pick Lily up every other Saturday morning, and we go to Sweetwater Creek State Park, which is 20 minutes from my house, and we walk the trail down to the ruins. And she collects rocks and asks me questions about why the old mill fell down, and what the people who worked there ate for lunch, and whether there were any ghosts. I tell her there are no ghosts, probably, which she finds deeply unsatisfying, and I find endlessly entertaining. The $55,000 is being repaid in structured installments as part of a formal agreement. Philip advised me that the $19,000 in the separate account might not be fully recoverable without a longer fight, and I decided that wasn't a fight worth having. Some things cost what they cost. I learned that. There's something I want to say. If you're watching this and you recognize something in the story, maybe you're a grandfather or grandmother who has been told you can have 2 hours on a Saturday, pre-approved, pre-scheduled, pre-managed. Maybe you gave money to your child because you believe that's what family does, and now that money is being used as a reason you should be grateful for the access you're getting. Maybe your child is standing in the same room as all this, looking at their shoes. What happened to me has a name. It's called financial coercion, and it's part of a pattern that isolates people from family members who might otherwise notice something is wrong. The person doing the isolating doesn't usually announce themselves. They introduce rules slowly, one at a time, and each individual rule sounds almost reasonable, and before long, you're following a laminated schedule, just to sit in a room with your grandchild for 120 minutes. I'm not a litigious man. I spent my career in construction. I understand load-bearing structures. I understand that some things look solid until you check what they're sitting on. Grandparents have rights in Georgia and in most states. They are not unlimited rights, and they are not automatic, but they are real. If access to your grandchild is being systematically withheld, you can petition the court. You don't have to accept the terms being offered to you as though they're the only option. Talk to a family law attorney in your state before you decide you have no choices. If you give money to your children, document it. A simple letter. The amount, the purpose, whether it's a gift or a loan. Not because you don't trust them. Because documentation protects everyone, including the relationship. I know that now in a way I didn't know it before. And if you see someone in your family being slowly pushed to the edges, a parent who only gets scheduled windows, a grandparent following a printed list of rules just to see a 4-year-old, say something. Not to start a fight. Just say something. Because the person inside it usually can't see the whole shape of it yet. They're too busy trying to follow the rules and not rock the boat and tell themselves it's probably fine. Last week, Lily found a heron at the creek. We'd been watching the water from a flat rock and it just appeared on the opposite bank, perfectly still, looking at something in the water we couldn't see. Lily grabbed my sleeve and didn't say anything for almost a full minute, which if you know any 5-year-olds you understand is essentially a miracle. Then she whispered, "Grandpa Grant, what is it doing?" I told her it was waiting. She thought about that for a while. Then she said, "Is it going to get what it's waiting for?" I told her probably yes. Claire used to stop cold whenever she saw a heron. She said they always looked like they knew something nobody had told them yet. I didn't tell Lily that. I just watched the bird with her until it lifted off over the tree line and was gone. And she narrated the whole thing under her breath like a sports commentator calling the final play. And I thought about Claire. And I thought that the creek is 20 minutes from my house, and we're going to be back here next Saturday, and the one after that. And the one after that. I've thought a lot about what I could have done differently. Not in a way that keeps me up at night anymore, but in the quiet way you turn something over when you finally have enough distance to look at it straight. The honest answer is that I don't think I made many wrong moves. What I did wrong was assume that generosity communicated itself, that giving Owen $55,000 without conditions or contracts or documentation would be understood as love, and that love would be returned in kind. That's not naivety exactly. That's just what I believed family meant. I was wrong about who I was dealing with, and I paid for that the expensive way. But here's what I've come to understand sitting at that kitchen table where Claire used to grade papers. The outcome of this story wasn't luck. It wasn't even the attorney or the banker, though Philip and Greg were both essential. The outcome was the result of a specific set of decisions I made after I read that printed list on my front porch and drove home in silence. I decided not to react. I decided to document. I decided to be patient in a situation that was designed to make patience feel like losing. That's not a natural thing for most people. When someone treats you as a problem to be managed, every instinct you have tells you to push back immediately, to make the unfairness visible, to say out loud what everyone in the room already knows. I understand that instinct. I felt it every single Saturday I showed up with 48 hours notice and parked on the street and sat on that beige sectional for exactly 2 hours. But I also understood something from 23 years of building things. You don't fight a bad structure by throwing yourself at the wall. You find out what it's actually sitting on. Then you work from there. What Simone was running was a system that depended on me not knowing my rights and not documenting my losses. The moment I understood that, the moment I stopped trying to be reasonable within her terms and started understanding that her terms were the problem, everything shifted. Not emotionally. Practically. I want to say something about Owen because I think it matters. He wasn't villainous in this. He was a man who had been living inside a version of events that had been carefully curated for him. And he didn't have the documentation to see it clearly. When I handed him that envelope, I wasn't trying to end his marriage. I was trying to give him the same thing I'd finally given myself. The actual facts, laid out plainly, without anyone else's interpretation layered on top. What he did with those facts was his choice. It still is. Lily found a heron at the creek last week. She watched it for almost a full minute without saying a word, which if you spent any time with a 5-year-old you know is extraordinary. Then, she looked up at me and asked if it was going to get what it was waiting for. I told her probably yes. I believed it when I said it. The creek is 20 minutes from my house. We'll be back there next Saturday. That's what I worked for. Not the money, not the legal victory, not being right about any of it. Just that. My granddaughter's hand on my sleeve and a heron on the opposite bank and nowhere else either of us needs to be.